The sun was setting outside the large glass windows of Terminal B, casting a golden glow over the bustling airport. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, their faces etched with exhaustion or excitement, depending on where they were headed. Among them stood Captain Marcus Hayes, his tall frame leaning slightly against the wall as he waited to board his flight home. Marcus had just completed his third tour overseas, serving his country with unwavering dedication. His uniform wasn't visible today. He wore a simple pair of jeans and a navy blue sweater, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded respect. It was in the steadiness of his gaze and the quiet confidence in his posture. To anyone who took the time to look closely, it was clear this man had seen things most people couldn't imagine. As he approached the gate counter, Marcus pulled out his boarding pass. The ticket was special, a gesture of gratitude from the airline for his military service. First-class seating awaited him, a small but meaningful reward for years spent far from home. He handed the ticket to the gate agent, exchanging a polite smile before stepping into the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the usual pre-flight chaos played out. Families juggled backpacks and snacks while business travelers typed furiously on laptops, trying to finish emails before takeoff. Marcus found his seat near the front of the cabin, settling into the plush leather chair with a sense of relief. For once, he allowed himself to relax. This was the first step toward reuniting with his family after months away. But then, everything changed. A woman named Patricia appeared at the aisle, her designer handbag slung over one shoulder, and an air of entitlement surrounding her like perfume. She glanced down at her own boarding pass, then back at Marcus, her brow furrowing instantly. Her sharp eyes darted between him and the seat number above his headrest. Something didn't sit right with her. "Excuse me," Patricia said loudly enough to turn heads nearby. "Are you sure you're in the correct seat?" Marcus looked up calmly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am. This is my assigned seat." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She studied him again, his casual attire, his calm demeanor, and seemed to decide something silently. "I don't think so," she replied curtly. "This is my seat. I paid for first class, and I expect to be seated accordingly." Her tone drew stares from other passengers. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene, while others watched curiously, waiting to see how Marcus would respond. "I assure you, ma'am, this is my seat," Marcus repeated, his voice steady and respectful despite the growing tension. He reached for his boarding pass, holding it up briefly to show her the confirmation. Instead of calming her down, the document only seemed to fuel Patricia's frustration. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, shaking her head. "There must be some kind of mistake," she insisted. "You don't look like someone who belongs here." Her words hung heavily in the air, slicing through the hum of conversation around them. Marcus felt the weight of her accusation but chose not to react. Years of discipline had taught him patience even in moments like this. Still, the murmurs spreading through the cabin told him one thing. Everyone was watching now. What none of them realized, not Patricia, not Marcus, not even the curious onlookers, was that another passenger had been observing the entire exchange, from behind. Someone whose presence might change everything. Patricia's words echoed through the cabin, sharp and unyielding. Her accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with judgment. Marcus felt the sting of her comment but refused to let it show on his face. He had faced far worse challenges during his time in service, and he wasn't about to let this moment break him. Instead, he took a deep breath, keeping his tone calm and measured. "Ma'am," Marcus began again, his voice steady despite the tension rising around them. "I understand your concern, but I assure you there's no mistake. This is my assigned seat." Patricia didn't back down. If anything, she grew more agitated. She waved her own boarding pass dramatically, as if trying to prove her point without actually looking at it. "Well, clearly someone messed up," she snapped. "I paid for first class and I expect to sit where I'm supposed to." Her voice carried an edge that made nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. At this point, one of the flight attendants stepped forward, sensing the growing unease among the passengers. The young woman, wearing a crisp uniform and a practiced smile, approached Patricia with professionalism. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass? Let me double-check everything for you," she offered gently. Patricia handed over the slip of paper with exaggerated emphasis, as though expecting the attendant to confirm her suspicions immediately. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly, his hands resting on his lap. He could feel the eyes of other travelers burning into him, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few openly disapproving. It was a strange feeling, being judged so publicly for simply sitting in a seat he had every right to occupy. The flight attendant glanced between the two boarding passes, her expression neutral. After a brief pause, she spoke up. "Actually, ma'am, everything appears to be correct. Mr. Hayes is indeed assigned to this seat. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with your reservation?" Patricia's cheeks flushed red, not from embarrassment, but from anger. She turned back to Marcus, her tone sharper than ever. "Are you even supposed to be here? You don't look like someone who belongs in first class." Her words struck a nerve, not just with Marcus but with several passengers, who were now watching intently. One older gentleman seated nearby leaned forward, shaking his head slightly. A mother holding her child's hand shot Patricia a disapproving glance. Even the flight attendant seemed taken aback by the blatant rudeness. Marcus, however, remained composed. Years of training had taught him how to handle high-pressure situations, and he wasn't about to lose his cool over something like this. "Ma'am," he said softly, leaning forward slightly, "I've served my country overseas for nearly 10 years. This ticket was given to me as a gesture of gratitude. I think we can all agree that everyone deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or where they come from." His words were simple yet powerful, resonating with those listening. For a moment, silence fell over the cabin. Patricia opened her mouth to retort, but no sound came out. She looked flustered, unsure of how to respond. Just then, another passenger, a man seated directly behind Marcus, cleared his throat loudly. Everyone turned to look at him. He was older, with silver hair and a distinguished presence. There was something authoritative about the way he carried himself, and when he spoke, his voice commanded attention. "I couldn't help but overhear," the man said, his tone firm but polite. "And I must say, I find this situation quite troubling. May I ask what exactly is causing the issue here?" His question caught Patricia off guard. She hesitated, glancing nervously between Marcus and the newcomer. Whatever she had planned to say next died on her lips as she realized the tide of opinion in the cabin was shifting. What none of them knew yet, what Patricia certainly didn't realize, was that the man speaking wasn't just any ordinary passenger. His identity would soon become clear, adding an unexpected twist to the unfolding drama. The older man's voice carried a quiet authority that demanded respect. His piercing blue eyes scanned the scene before him, taking in every detail, the tension etched on Marcus's face, Patricia's defensive stance, and the uneasy looks exchanged by other passengers. He adjusted his suit jacket slightly as he stood up from his seat, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I asked a question," the man said again, addressing Patricia directly this time. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for evasion. "What seems to be the problem here?" Patricia hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden intervention. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the older man, her confidence wavering under the weight of his steady gaze. "Well," she began, fumbling for words, I just think there's been some kind of mix-up. This is my seat, and—" Before she could finish, the flight attendant interjected politely. "Sir," she said, turning to the older man, "we're handling the situation. Everything has been verified and Mr. Hayes is correctly seated." The older man nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to Patricia. "So, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that this gentleman doesn't belong in first class because of how he looks?" Patricia stiffened, clearly uncomfortable with the way the conversation was heading. "That's not what I said," she replied defensively, though her voice lacked conviction. I just want to sit where I paid for. Ah, yes, the older man continued, his tone thoughtful yet pointed. Where you paid for. Tell me, ma'am, do you believe money determines someone's worth? Or perhaps you feel entitled to judge others based on appearances? His questions hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Patricia to confront the implications of her behavior. Her cheeks flushed red once more, but this time it wasn't from anger. It was embarrassment. She opened her mouth to respond, only to close it again when she realized she had no satisfactory answer. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly, watching the exchange unfold. He appreciated the older man's defense, but didn't want the situation to escalate further. Sir, Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. Thank you for stepping in. But I'd rather not make a big deal out of this. If the airline can find another solution, I'm happy to cooperate. The older man raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Marcus's humility. Mr. Hayes, he said warmly, you've shown remarkable patience and grace throughout this ordeal. But let me assure you, this isn't about making a fuss. It's about standing up for what's right. At that moment, one of the other passengers, a middle-aged woman sitting across the aisle, spoke up. He's absolutely right, she chimed in, her voice filled with conviction. You shouldn't have to tolerate such disrespect, especially after everything you've done for our country. Her comment sparked a ripple effect among the passengers. Murmurs of agreement spread through the cabin, with several people nodding in solidarity. Even those who had initially remained silent now seemed eager to support Marcus. Patricia looked around, realizing she was increasingly isolated. The tide had turned against her, and there was no denying it. Still, she refused to admit defeat entirely. Fine, she muttered under her breath, crossing her arms tightly. If everyone's so convinced, then maybe I'm the one who should move. The flight attendant quickly stepped in to defuse the situation. Ma'am, we'll gladly assist you with finding another available seat, she offered diplomatically. We appreciate your understanding. As Patricia reluctantly gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, the older man leaned closer to Marcus, lowering his voice. Don't worry, son, he said with a reassuring smile. This isn't over yet. Sometimes life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. Marcus nodded gratefully, sensing there was more to this stranger than met the eye. Little did he know, the man's involvement would soon reveal something extraordinary. Not just for Patricia, but for everyone on board. And unbeknownst to anyone else, the older man pulled out his phone and sent a quick text message. Within seconds, a reply came back. Understood. Proceed as planned. Whatever was coming next, it promised to change the course of this journey forever. As Patricia reluctantly moved to a different seat near the back of the plane, muttering under her breath about unfair treatment, the atmosphere in first class began to shift. The tension that had gripped the cabin moments earlier slowly eased, replaced by a mix of curiosity and quiet admiration for Marcus's composure. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly at how calmly he had handled the situation. Meanwhile, the older man who had intervened settled back into his seat directly behind Marcus. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees as if preparing to continue their conversation. His demeanor was warm, but carried an air of mystery, as though he knew something no one else did. Mr. Hayes, the man said softly, catching Marcus's attention. May I ask you a personal question? Marcus turned slightly, meeting the man's gaze. There was something sincere in his expression that made it hard to refuse. Of course, sir, Marcus replied politely. What would you like to know? The older man hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. You've served your country admirably, haven't you? Overseas deployments, long periods away from home. It must have been incredibly challenging. Marcus nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Serving my country is something I'm proud of. I can see that, the man said, his voice tinged with respect. And yet, despite all you've done, you still find yourself facing judgment from people who don't take the time to understand what you've sacrificed. Marcus shrugged, trying to downplay the comment. Unfortunately, situations like this aren't new. Over time, you learn not to let it get to you. The older man studied him for a moment longer before leaning back, in his seat. Well, Mr. Hayes, I think it's important that people recognize the value of individuals like yourself, people who dedicate their lives to protecting others. That's why I felt compelled to step in earlier. His words struck a chord with Marcus, though he couldn't quite place why. There was something oddly familiar about the way the man spoke, as if he were quoting principles from a higher authority. Before Marcus could respond, the flight attendant approached once again. This time, however, she addressed the older man directly. "Excuse me, sir," she said hesitantly, holding out a small envelope. "This message came through for you while we were resolving the seating issue. It's marked urgent." The older man accepted the envelope with a nod, opening it quickly and scanning its contents. A subtle smile crossed his lips as he read the note inside. Without explaining further, he tucked it into his pocket and glanced at Marcus. "Something tells me this flight is going to be more eventful than any of us anticipated," he remarked cryptically. Marcus frowned, unsure what to make of the comment. "Is everything okay, sir?" "Oh, yes," the man assured him, his tone light but meaningful. "In fact, I believe things are about to improve significantly, for everyone involved." At that moment, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that the plane was preparing for takeoff. Passengers buckled their seatbelts and stowed away their belongings as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Despite the lull in activity, the older man's presence continued to draw attention. A young couple seated nearby leaned closer to each other, whispering quietly. "Do you think he's someone important?" the woman asked her partner. "I don't know," the man replied, "but he sure acts like it." Unbeknownst to them, or to anyone else on board, the older man's identity was far more significant than they could have imagined. As the plane lifted off the ground and soared into the sky, he pulled out his phone once again, typing a brief message. Within seconds, another reply appeared. "Perfect. Proceed to phase 2. Whatever was coming next, it was clear that the stranger had a plan, and it seemed likely to involve Marcus in ways none of them could predict. For now, though, Marcus remained unaware of the role he was about to play in an unfolding drama. All he knew was that the man sitting behind him exuded confidence and purpose, qualities that hinted at a deeper story waiting to be revealed. And as the plane climbed higher, the clouds outside the window seemed to mirror the growing sense of anticipation inside the cabin. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and it would change the lives of everyone on board forever. As the plane soared smoothly through the skies, the older man leaned forward once again, his eyes locking, onto Marcus with an intensity that made the soldier instinctively sit up straighter. There was something magnetic about the stranger's presence, a quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. "Mr. Hayes," the man began, his voice low but clear enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "Have you ever wondered why certain moments in life feel significant? Like they're meant to lead somewhere bigger than we can see at the time?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, intrigued by the question. "I suppose I've thought about it," he admitted. "After everything I've been through, I've learned that sometimes the hardest experiences teach us the most valuable lessons." The older man nodded approvingly, as if Marcus's response confirmed something he already knew. "Exactly," he said, leaning back slightly. "And this moment, right? Now, this flight is one of those times, but not just for you, for everyone here." His cryptic words drew puzzled looks from a few passengers seated nearby. A businessman typing on his laptop paused mid-sentence, glancing over curiously. Even the flight attendants seemed to sense that something unusual was unfolding, their movements slower and more deliberate as they passed by. Before Marcus could ask what the man meant, the intercom crackled to life once again. This time, however, it wasn't the pilot's voice that filled the cabin. It was the unmistakable tone of someone used to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the voice, calm yet commanding. "We hope you're enjoying your flight so far. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll be making an unscheduled stop shortly. Please remain seated, and our crew will provide further instructions when the time comes." A ripple of murmurs spread through the plane. Unscheduled stops were rare, and the announcement left many passengers uneasy. Some glanced out the windows, searching for signs of turbulence or mechanical issues, while others whispered nervously, among themselves. Patricia, now seated near the rear of the plane, looked visibly agitated. She muttered under her breath, complaining about delays and inconvenience. Her irritation only grew when she noticed several passengers turning their heads toward the front of the cabin, instead of sharing her frustration. Meanwhile, the older man smiled faintly, as though the announcement had been exactly what he expected. He turned to Marcus, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Mr. Hayes, sometimes life gives us opportunities to reflect on our actions, to reconsider how we treat others, and whether we truly understand the impact of our choices." Marcus furrowed, his brow unsure where the conversation was heading. "Are you saying all of this has something to do with what happened earlier?" The older man chuckled softly. "In a way, yes, but it's also much larger than that. You see, every person on this plane has a story, and tonight those stories are going to intersect in ways none of us anticipated." Just then, the plane began its descent, breaking through the clouds to reveal a small airstrip below. It wasn't a major airport, just a modest facility surrounded by open fields. As the wheels touched down gently, the cabin fell silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Once the plane came to a stop, the flight attendants opened the doors, allowing cool night air to sweep through the cabin. To everyone's surprise, a group of uniformed officers stepped aboard, their polished boots clicking against the floor. They moved with precision, stopping near the front of the plane before addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the officers announced, "we apologize for the unexpected stop. However, we have important business to attend to, one that involves recognizing the extraordinary contributions of someone on this flight." All eyes turned to Marcus, who sat frozen in his seat, unsure what to expect next. The older man behind him simply smiled, as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. What no one realized yet was that the true purpose of this detour, and the identity of the mysterious stranger, was about to change everything. The cabin was eerily quiet as the uniformed officers made their way down the aisle, their presence commanding respect and curiosity. Every passenger watched intently, some leaning forward in anticipation while others exchanged bewildered glances. The air buzzed with unanswered questions. Why had the plane stopped here? Who were these officers and what did they want? Marcus sat frozen in his seat, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the situation. He glanced at the older man seated behind him, seeking clarity, but the stranger simply offered a reassuring nod. There was something knowing in his expression, as if he'd orchestrated the entire scene. One of the officers stepped forward, addressing the passengers directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "We are here tonight to honor an individual whose dedication, courage, and service have gone above and beyond the call of duty." At that moment, all eyes turned toward Marcus. Some passengers gasped softly while others smiled knowingly, piecing together the connection between the officer's words and the soldier sitting quietly in first class. "Captain Marcus Hayes," the officer continued, his tone filled with reverence, "you may not realize it, but your actions have touched countless lives, not only through your military service but also through the humility and grace you've shown even in difficult moments like today." Marcus blinked in disbelief, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this kind of recognition, especially not during a routine flight home. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to say anything," the officer replied warmly. "Tonight we're here to say it for you and on behalf of everyone who owes you gratitude." With that, another officer stepped forward, holding a small wooden box adorned with an American flag. Inside was a medal gleaming under the dim cabin lights, a prestigious award reserved for those who demonstrated exceptional bravery and leadership. "This is long overdue," the officer said, presenting the box to Marcus. "For your unwavering commitment to protecting our nation, both abroad and within its borders, we proudly present you with this commendation." A wave of applause erupted throughout the cabin, growing louder as Marcus accepted the medal with trembling hands. Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked around at the faces of his fellow passengers, each one smiling or nodding in admiration. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not just as a soldier, but as a person. Amid the celebration, Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat near the back of the plane. Her earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by shame and regret. She couldn't help but replay the confrontation in her mind, cringing at how she judged Marcus based on appearances alone. Now seeing him honored so publicly, she realized how wrong she had been. As the applause subsided, the older man stood up from his seat, drawing everyone's attention once again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the cabin. "Tonight isn't just about recognizing Captain Hayes, it's about reminding ourselves of the values that unite us: respect, gratitude, and understanding." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the passengers before settling on Patricia. "Sometimes life gives us second chances, to learn, to grow, and to do better. Let this be one of those moments." Patricia lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew she couldn't undo her behavior earlier, but she vowed silently to change moving forward. Meanwhile, Marcus looked at the older man, finally putting the pieces together. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice tinged with The man smiled mysteriously. "Just someone who believes in honoring heroes and ensuring justice finds its way." Before Marcus could press further, the officers ushered everyone back to their seats, signaling that the plane would soon resume its journey. But as the engines roared to life once more, the impact of the evening lingered in every corner of the cabin. For Marcus, it was a night he would never forget. And for everyone else, it was a reminder that even the simplest acts of kindness can ripple outward, changing hearts and lives forever. As the plane lifted off the ground once again, the mood on board had transformed completely. The tension that had filled the cabin earlier was replaced by a sense of unity and reflection. Passengers who had been strangers just hours before now exchanged warm smiles and quiet nods, as if they shared a bond forged in the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus sat quietly in his seat, still clutching the wooden box containing the medal. His fingers traced the edges of the flag draped over it, each fold reminding him of the sacrifices and triumphs that had led to this moment. Though he had always carried pride in his service, tonight felt different. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of the impact he'd made, not just through his actions overseas, but through the quiet dignity he showed even when faced with judgment. The older man leaned forward slightly from his seat behind Marcus, his voice soft yet deliberate. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace tonight, Captain Hayes," he said. "Not everyone would have remained so composed after being treated unfairly." Marcus turned slightly, meeting the man's gaze. "Thank you, sir," he replied, earnestly. "But I think what happened here tonight wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, learning to see past our assumptions and recognize the humanity in others." The older man nodded approvingly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Exactly. That's why I stepped in earlier, to remind everyone that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, and sometimes life gives us moments like this to help us grow." His words lingered in the air, resonating not only with Marcus, but also with those listening nearby. Patricia, seated at the back of the plane, wiped away tears as she mulled over her behavior earlier. She realized how much harm could come from snap judgments and prejudice, and vowed silently to be more mindful moving forward. Before long, the pilot announced their final descent into the destination city. As the plane prepared to land, the older man stood up from his seat, adjusting his suit jacket carefully. He extended a hand toward Marcus, who shook it firmly. "It's been an honor meeting you, Captain Hayes," the man said warmly. "Remember, your story doesn't end here. There are always opportunities to inspire others, whether you realize it or not." With that, he walked down the aisle and disappeared among the other passengers disembarking the plane. Despite Marcus's attempts to catch another glimpse of him later, the mysterious stranger seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only the memory of his words and actions. Once on the ground, Marcus stepped out into the terminal, where his family awaited. His wife embraced him tightly, her eyes filling with tears as she noticed the medal in his hand. Their children jumped up and down excitedly, proud of their father's accomplishments. Surrounding them were several fellow passengers who had approached to congratulate Marcus personally, thanking him for his service and sharing how inspired they were by the events of the flight. Among them was Patricia, who hesitated nervously before stepping forward. "Captain Hayes," she began, her voice trembling, "I owe you an apology. What I said earlier, it was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. You deserve nothing but respect, and I hope you can forgive me." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then nodded kindly. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Patricia smiled gratefully, her shoulders visibly relaxing as she walked away. Watching her leave, Marcus reflected on the power of forgiveness and how even difficult moments could lead to growth and understanding. As he hugged his family once more, Marcus knew this journey had changed him in ways he couldn't fully grasp yet. It wasn't just about the recognition or the medal. It was about the reminder that every action, no matter how small, could ripple outward and touch lives far beyond what he imagined. And somewhere, perhaps unseen, the older man watched the scene unfold with a satisfied smile, knowing that his mission had been accomplished. Life, after all, was full of second chances, and tonight, everyone on that flight had taken one step closer to becoming better versions of themselves.